The PS4 has a plethora of weird and unusual games, making it a breeding ground for odd ducks like you and I. While there's no such thing as a game no one has heard of, these are 5 PS4 games I rarely heard talked about, in a cesspool of varied genres. Unfortunately, I am not starting off with a game I feel especially in love with, but I think if you're into Metal Gear Solid 4, mechs, and with it being a spin off of Front Mission, Left Alive might be something to try. The developers had dipped their toes into the mecha genre with Gundam Breakers 1 to 3, on top of doing Bandai licensed work like Black Clover. Remember when people liked that anime? I have no idea where they went. Anyhow, Left Alive was published by Square Enix, and they did absolutely nothing for the game in terms of promotion. It just dropped on the PS4 and Steam in 2019, and tanked in both sales and reception. Now that's curious to me, given the creatives involved, with most of them being from the Kojima Productions. Take one look at the cover here. Then look at this one. Yes, that's from the artist Yoji Shinkawa. The case is sure to tell you that about 900 times. But besides the visuals, the scenarios were written by a lot of the writers for MGS4 in particular. And you can pick up on this within the first 20 seconds of the game.
In favor of economic blocks, full-blown wars became things of the past.
You know, Left Alive feels a lot like Metal Gear Solid, even in the way it's designed. Do you remember the mission in MGS4 where you can dress Old Snake in a young Snake mask and wear a trench coat while chasing someone along the neo-noir-looking streets? The vibe of this section is what the entirety of Left Alive feels like to me, but with way more fire and yelling. Oh, and shaky cam. How can I forget? I almost threw up almost 10 times through the game because of that. See, the game really wants to be like a war movie, with both wide shots and handheld moments at every chance it gets. It's very effective, especially at times of grounded, fearful monologuing. The vocal cast actually had a few up-and-comers, the one I noticed immediately being the voice of Felix in Fire Emblem Three Houses, named Lucian Dodge. I met him in 2021 at Anime Central, by the way. He was awesome and signed my copy with no issues, on top of going out of his way to shake everyone's hand. It was pretty cool. Besides the direction, I want to praise the setting just a little bit more. There's tons of destruction, rubble, burnt cars, dead bodies, wet streets, snowy skies, and more for your eyes to feast upon. The costumes on everyone look appropriately Cold War inspired, and the buildings look very 1940s European. It's honestly nice to look at. I just need the camera to slow the frick down so I can actually enjoy it. So in theory, this is a genre mix of shooter, stealth, survival, and adventure, though I feel it only succeeds in one of those waves. Uh-oh. When it comes to shooting, the guns aim pretty narrowly and cover shooting is sort of a joke. You cannot easily switch position for aiming, so if you're stuck to cover on your right, you have to stand up, get shot, and then cover again to your left. They also had to patch in the ability to do headshots. That's right. When the game launched, 2 shots to the head did zilch. The other issue is that even on normal difficulty, there are just so many enemies at all sides that you get flooded out too easily, and they shoot like monsters and take you down within seconds compared to yourself. So, if shooting isn't super fun, what's stealth like? Well, you have no map that can help you figure out where enemies are, and that teamed up with your camera's lack of range, you'll hit a corner and get blasted to bits. See, in MGS, if you're to get caught, it's not game over because you can shoot your way out of it. But in this one, when mechs are involved especially, you're just done. Start over and lose 30 minutes of progress because maps are huge and save states aren't very common. The only feasible way I found to progress was to juke him on foot. Roll, run, cover, dodge, get out of every situation like a big weenie. And if you're in a mech, you're probably fine. But the controls are odd, and since the thing is so slow, I found myself getting screwed more often than not in tight spaces. Later in the game, though, you have bigger areas to play in with the mech, and that means you can go fast without hitting walls as often. A small victory there. But of course, they also had to patch the game and fix the amount of times you could stay in the mech, because originally you would blow up after only 10 hits. That's insane. I mentioned earlier that this was a Front Mission spin-off. I have yet to play one of those games, so unfortunately I can't speak from my own experiences. But in 2010, Front Mission Evolved got slammed critically for its hardly AA graphics and storyline, while also pushing mechs that controlled poorly. At least from what I've heard, right? So if this was the direction the series was going in, why did the next game that they had come out be a hot mess that at times hardly felt quality tested? Well, they were able to get director Toshifumi Nabeshima, who worked on Armored Core for only one game, 20 years before LA. And with all the other Kojima help they could get, I think Enix got cocky. They wanted to do something grand, and they had waited 9 years between Evolved and this one. So it seemed like they thought this was going to be the next big move. Before Nabeshima was involved, the game was going to be a more traditional, slow mech strategy game, like they've done with Front Mission First Mission, most recently. But when Nabeshima got involved, they moved to the faster Armored Core mechs. I'm linking an interview with him below, and he really stresses less about the gameplay, and more about the characters and grounded work. LA feels like his vision over everything, and did he succeed in doing a war-torn story? I think he kinda did. There's about 2.5 hours of cutscenes overall, so Nabeshima isn't quite going for Kojima levels of movie making, but it does what it needs to with brevity. There are even some optional dialogue choices which I found kind of fun. Each of the 3 protagonists have shared screen time, and I'd say they do fulfill their own little story arcs rather well. Each of them have their own agenda, and thankfully nothing ends on a cliffhanger. It all wraps up with a little bow. Is it anything devastatingly heart-moving? No, but it's the only thing I really came away from happily with this game. I know this isn't a glowing recommendation, but one of you might be into this, and that's good enough for me. If you want to play it, it's dirt cheap on Amazon, eBay, and the like. Oh, and there's some DLC that's still active until 2029 in case you want some random stuff. Now for a surprisingly good licensed game, let's talk about Psycho-Pass Mandatory Happiness, shall we? There are tons of anime licensed visual novels, especially on the Vita, which is where this game was first ported to around 2015. With low Vita sales in the US, it's no surprise it also dropped on PS4. Psycho-Pass is a 2013 anime I have limited experience with, though I'm gonna have to remedy that after how much I enjoyed Mandatory Happiness. With licensed visual novels, often it's a total reenactment of the show's plot but with an OC. Or, it's a spin-off with an OC. This game is the latter, with 2 new characters to play as. The story is set firmly in the world ruled by the Sybil system. In other words, a world that runs based off of people regularly checking their mental status. If the status goes bad, they become latent criminals and get killed on the spot by enforcers, cops ordered by your character's command. Before I get ahead of myself, I want to warn you that this is a lot easier to have watched the show and then played the game to understand all of the terms and characters involved. But the game does have a glossary that gives you information as it comes up. You can also save on the fly, a handy tool for one seeking all outcomes. Let me just say there is so much content in this game. The amount of branching paths and endings is wild, and from what I gather, one playthrough is about 7 hours, and it'll likely take you 30 hours to get all the endings and unlockables. I only got one ending thus far, but I'd like to watch the show and then come back to it later. The story is very thrilling and really pushes the boundaries to get a greater message being what happens when an entire society is ruled by one computerized idea about what the right way to feel and behave is. It's very much a commentary on the Chinese social credit system without saying it outright. It also pushes the boundary on morality. For example, what happens if a literal toddler becomes a latent criminal? The law says to shoot them on sight, but morally, no siree. They could be treated and taught to be different. Nature versus nurture arguments for days. Genuinely, it's really interesting stuff, so I'm going to leave the plot out of it. If you want to see how to get all the endings, I'm also going to leave a guide down below. Gameplay is straightforward. Lots of reading, choices here and there that aren't timed, and there's a couple choices to befriend a few of the characters by taking them out with you. Of course, your choices not just affect endings, but also which of the characters like you or despise you. This is no Ace Attorney game where there's tons of exploration required of you, so expect to be doing a lot more reading than anything else. The lines are voice acted, but only in Japanese, so if you're of the dyslexic variety, this may be a big struggle. That being said, the acting is great, and the character designs are very faithful to the real deal. But then the OCs look a bit out of place, as per usual in these scenarios. At least they aren't obnoxiously different. The only thing I notice is that with such limited animation, the times they do blink or when mouths move, it feels like they need a lot more frames. But I suppose this wasn't going to be noticed on the Vita. The art of each area looks very shiny and well lit, plastered in light blues and soft grays. It's got a clean and straight-laced future Tokyo look without being extra sci-fi where floating cars and the like are all around. It's all digital work, so it has that early 2010s tone, if you know what I mean. There's not much dinge, even in areas that are supposed to be run down. It's a choice, though, and I like it for the technologically forward world they're going for. If you're looking to buy, the game is under $20 on PS4. There's also a really nice special edition that's reasonably priced around $40, with a sick art book, CD, and more. I actually kind of want to get it one day. Again, I really liked the game, and you might as well if you're into the visual novel variety, where you can kick back and enjoy the ride. Speaking of Vita games ported to the PS4, have you heard of Falcom's action RPG titled Tokyo Xanadu EX Plus? Well, consider yourself in the know, because this is a Persona-like, a Trails of-like, even an Ys-like, if you will. It hardly looks AA, but who cares, because this is a fantastic game to control. The dungeons of the game have tight corridors that are a pleasure to get through because the enemies are so well placed. You want to get high combos to move faster through areas, and with all the congestion, you're racking up combos like you're playing Devil May Cry. And speaking of DMC, you get ranked for your performance, and the higher the rank, the better the loot and increase of your character's social stats. I'll get into the character stuff later, but as for the dungeon transversal, you only go in with one character at a time. You can swap between the party members at will, but because the enemies have specific weaknesses, you'll want to not just rely on one character and rotate frequently. It's a very addictive gameplay loop, with bosses that can really take you out of it if you aren't thoroughly fighting and leveling up as you make your way to them. When it comes to characters in Falcom games, which I admit to having little experience with as of now, I always hear about the endearing characters and NPCs you really want to get to know. This game is no different. All the characters were interesting and had tons to say. There are a lot of times you get to hang out one-on-one, and this can lead to various romances. It's not quite the dating sim of Persona, but it's getting there, and I heard there may be a sequel on the horizon that will likely push that more. There's a social system of wisdom, virtue, and courage that you can improve in order to get the true ending. While the story is a typical student save the world plot, the highlight is the characters, so keep in mind that there won't be anything too groundbreaking in that regard, but to make an effort to engage with them. The true fun is in the world, with the pseudo-modern aesthetic and half-alternative streetwear clothing on everyone. I enjoyed walking around, looking at the whitewashed school hallways, and standing on the rooftops, walking through the streets. It's thorough, and art design is one of my favorite parts of games if you haven't already noticed from my many videos. So allow me to now cry about how good these promo illustrations look. The composition of the poses is fantastic, and the character colors really pop on the background. I understand that these are somewhat generic character designs, but whatever. When you get to know the personalities, they really start to shine. Just like real people, yeah? The English release only has Japanese dubbing, so, as one would expect, the voices are great. No squeaky yells or random shouts from any of the girls. It's pretty toned down in a good way. If you would like to give this little gem a try, it's on PS4 for under $20, and there's a newly translated Switch version for about $40. Keep your wits about you on that Nintendo release. It'll likely boost in price over time since it's Falcom. Are you craving a PS3 era hack and slash? Instead of muddy, poopy browns, it's bathed in blues and purples. Instead of Devil May Cry polish, its aim is to be Dragon Guard 3, but without the charm. The game at hand is Anima: Gate of Memories. This was dropped on the system in 2016 after a load of middling reviews on PC. Man, reviews or whatever, go try it yourself, stinkies. I found a lot to like in the gameplay department. It's a character action game which has you swapping between the female main character, dubbed the Bearer, and the male character called the Ergo Mundus. They function similarly, with nearly all buttons being used to dodge, blast from afar, block, kick hose in the air, combo, and much more. The main difference between the two is speed and hitboxes. The actual combat feels quite good, but the lock-on system is a struggle because the camera is fairly tight on you, so bridges and dodging can have you rolling right off and dying. Good thing that the autosave spawns you back very close to where you were. I also find it interesting how you can Dragon Ball blast at foes, but if they time it right, their blast can cancel yours. And it's freaking hard at times, with timely dodges and hits being a huge component to winning easily. The regular enemies are nothing, but the bosses are appropriately tricky to figure out what kinds of moves they have up their sleeves. It's like a little puzzle in itself, so it rewards you for messing around, dying, and then trying again. And before I forget, you can customize what items your character wears to increase defense, attack, and so on. I also thought it was helpful that you have 3 quick slots to equip health and other useful tools. You'll go through nearly 16 hours of gameplay, with multiple endings awaiting you depending on what you choose to fight. To simply give you a whiff of the story, there is a near-book kind of thing with powers that are unfathomable that everyone in the game seems to be scared of, trying to stop you with no holds barred. It's a bit predictable, but apparently it's based off a Spanish tabletop game called Anima Beyond Fantasy. The tabletop RPG seems to be deeply customizable and complicated, yet with such interesting ideas cooked up, it's astounding that they got a video game made. To do this, they started a little dev team called Anima Project, and got an Indiegogo up. With a modest budget, it seems to have been a decent success, because as of last year, they got a sequel funded with over 150,000 USD, and perks that include physical PS5 and Xbox copies. It's pretty stinking cool to see a little company getting their dreams done. And in all honesty, I have a feeling that Gate of Memories walks so that the sequel can run. Gate of Memories has some gorgeous character design, even if the graphical fidelity doesn't quite live up to the highs. Still, the gothic European vibes are rampant. You'll see urban places, dark cliffsides, musty tunnels, occult castles, and so much more. The enemy designs don't change much outside of the bosses, but with the amount of level design, having the platform and fight in such different aesthetically pleasing areas, I don't even care. Take a look at our leading lady. She may not always be lit the best in the game, but the back tattoo being flame red in contrast to the pure white top is saying something about her bad girl interior. There's such a style to everything, and like any game filled with personality, there are lots of silly unlockable outfits. The only personal gripe I have with the direction is that the cutscenes do that Bayonetta 1 thing, where they don't fully move, instead using the 3D models as if they're drawings, and play shot by shot. This is certainly a money-saving tactic, so that's totally okay. It's just that there wasn't a single cinematic to open with. And because the voice acting is poorly recorded and acted, it takes away a bit from the impact of the characters for me. Still, that may not bother you at all. I can't claim that this is like a 10 out of 10, but seriously, this is like a better version of Bullet Witch or something along those lines. It's just interesting, honestly. From what I have seen with my own perishing eyeballs, it seems as though the US release is on PS4, but it's a collector edition priced around $40. When I was working at a game store, the only reason I even knew about this game is because I found a PAL region copy. It has a cute little CD and art book. A fantastic deal for the 20 or so you'll be paying. We are now on to our last game, and boy is it a bizarre one. Kowloon High School Chronicle is a genre blend of hardcore first-person dungeon crawling and a visual novel. Both are difficult in the way of mechanics being fuzzy and poorly explained, but don't let that deter you. I'll explain the plot first. You get to name your own character, and you're someone working with a Middle Eastern treasure hunting group. The dungeon sections are filled with puzzles, traps, and enemies of many varieties. The opening dungeon is very straightforward and medieval, but you have weird technology to help you navigate, as well as a very strange human accomplice to assist you in battle. Battling gets easier over time, but even with the vague tips, you'll do so much fumbling around to understand the mechanics and button mapping. The battles are turn-based. You choose when to end them. You have to position your body to hit the enemies in the weak spot, which you discover by moving around and not letting yourself get cornered. You start with a simple gun and knife, but as the game progresses and the party members change, it gets better than that. This is not an easy game, not at all. And because the game is so unknown, even 3 years after release, guides are not quite the best. If you don't understand something, you have to just screw around and find out. This is the closest Gamers Born after the PS2 era will ever get to trial and error or word-of-mouth gaming. It's pretty sick. It's like playing something totally blind, but with that being said, it won't be for everyone because it is so elusive. I promise you, it's not that hard once you get into the flow. Just allow yourself to only half understand things for a time, and it'll all become clear eventually. One thing I'll say to relieve some fear is that enemies do not respawn until you fully leave the dungeon. And those dungeons don't even take too long to get through, so the pace isn't grinded to a halt. Plus, deaths don't make you lose too much progress. There are tons of items you can find along the way, and sometimes you can straight up give stuff away that seems nonsensical, but you do have to sometimes craft in order to finish puzzles. With that being said, you can give anything away, but I didn't find that I randomly gave away a key item, so my tip would be to try to keep one of everything you find, even if it isn't on hand and ends up at your room storage instead. I guess this game promotes hoarding, which I got that down pat. The story picks up after the introduction dungeon, where you're sent through your company to pose as a transfer student to discover some secrets underneath a Japanese high school. The school days are the visual novel parts. The characters are funky fresh with a goth girl, a bad boy, a token girlfriend, a rock addict, among other odd ducks. There are choices to make during dialogue, and my biggest tip is to say you have to pick what they want to hear and not what you want to say. There's this interesting emotion system to make choices with that, as expected, is loosely explained. You can respond with grief, anger, coldness, love, jealousy, just a whole bunch of ways, and it works in your favor to get the party members to join you. But those words are so oddly unspecific. Like, why would you ever choose love? It's somewhat of a roulette on whether you'll have them accept your response. You want them to go into dungeons with you because they have special weapons, like a tennis ball. And let me just say, the tennis ball, out of the guns, the knives, the bombs, yeah, that tennis ball is the best weapon. Kowloon is a nonsensical game that has zero interest in garnering a mainstream audience. In every way, it's obscure, and it oozes with self-assuredness. Look at this frankly ugly title text plastered on like a school JPEG. It's in its own league, guys. It's all a statement. The character designs are strangely off-putting in the way they are colored and sometimes look like they're patchworked texturally in an old version of Photoshop. The enemies are greatly off-putting, looking shiny and smooth while they writhe and smile deliriously right at you. It's all uncomfortable in a way that gets the horror fan in me going. There's an anime opening styled scene that I swear to you is a riff on Bebop's tank opening. There's tapping feet, spinning guns, a rapid edit, and it all just beats you over the head with such a reference. Quite pointedly, there's the Indiana Jones title font thrown everywhere. There are so many SMT references too, like with the overworld map having the little people icons. There's just a lot packed in. Like how in your bedroom you can stare at a Super Sentai poster before playing a full-on multiple-hour RPG on what's probably a Super Famicom that levels you up in the metagame. Kowloon is like an epic fan project. And as I got further in, I wanted to know more about where this came from and who the heck made it. So this is an upscaled port of a PS2 game published by Atlus and developed by Shout Design Works in 2004. It's actually part of a greater series called Tokyo Majin Gakken Denki. This reaches out past video games and goes into light novels and anime, with the only one I'm even vaguely familiar with being Tokyo Twilight Ghost Hunters, purely because the front cover was designed by the Three Houses artist. Shout Design Works is a very niche company, with not even a wiki to look at. It was a struggle to find much in the way of info. But I figured out that it was a company founded by a man who never has his picture taken, instead going by an alias and only using a toy to stand in for him if pictures or video were necessary. Reminds me of Yoko Taro, actually. The director of the Denki series is named Amai. He worked for Atlus as a scenario writer and developer until 1992, when he started Shout. The most recent game he developed is the aforementioned Tokyo Twilight in 2014. And since then, he's only helped the Deadly Premonition 2 team and directed the little-known Gal Metal game. Another underrated title, but that's for another day. The PS2 Kowloon looks almost exactly like the port we see now. It's just fuzzier on modern screens, and unfortunately, our copies don't have all the cool knickknacks. With the research I did about the Japanese version, things don't seem different gameplay-wise. So what we got in English is fantastically unedited and uncensored. That's pretty uncommon nowadays. If you want a copy of this game, it's only in PAL regions again, but as of right now, it'll run you $15 or less on PS4 for a game that's over 50 hours long. Bang for your buck, as they say. This video has gone on for a hot minute, and sometimes with these jam-packed collections, I struggle with how much or how little I say. If any of you made it to the end, please let me know if you think videos like this should be longer or shorter in your opinion. I have so much I can go into, especially with these multiple-hour JRPGs. Anyhow, thanks for watching, and I'm sure I'll make more underrated game videos sometime soon. Best to you all.